Welcome to the Worship Keys YouTube channel. My name is Carson Bruce. So glad you're here. We talk all things music theory, gear, industry, and ministry for your worship keys playing. If this episode is beneficial for you or you have any questions as you continue to watch, feel free to comment below, and I'd love to hear any feedback that you have along the way. So let's get into today's episode. Today, y'all are in for an incredible episode. I am with Seth Penn with Seth Builds Rigs. Guys, this episode's all about building playback tracks rigs and also talking about some pedal boards you can use when you're playing keys. So building pedal boards for your keyboard, which is super cool. Honestly, guys, this is the very best person that we could have had on the podcast to tell you guys about quality playback tracks, why you need it, redundancies, equipment, software, everything today. Guys, y'all are going to get so much value out of this. And Seth, you've worked with incredible artists and churches. And you've worked with Ed Sheeran for one. You worked with Stephen Curtis Chapman, and it's an off day for you because you work here at Crosspoint.
I do, yeah.
Nashville, which y'all have 6 campuses, right?
We do, yeah.
And tell us about that, man.
Yeah.
What do you do here?
Yes, I work full-time here, and we do have a lot of flexibility in our work here, which is such a blessing. Worked here since 2015, been here a while, and I'm on our music team, and so I work together with a lot of other people, and Ableton session creation is my main responsibility. So all our Sunday sessions, events, anything else, that's my main deal. But my title's music producer, so I let a lot of things fall under that, producing stuff with such a great team of a lot of people, producing some of our original music, but mainly Sunday stuff. And then I'm now putting the rig building as I'm producing rigs under that banner too. Yeah, man, that's how the Seth Builds Rigs thing got started. I just taught myself to solder finally. For years I was like, I need to make my own cables, this is ridiculous. And finally taught myself, just started trial and error. I started putting together rigs for the church, and again had done that before without the soldering specifically, so I already had a mind for the Tetris of it and putting together the pieces and the elements, but had a friend and multiple friends help with the actual nuts and bolts. But then, like I said, transitioned to learning that myself, and man, cool. I'm super grateful that I've had the flexibility in this job to be able to change what my role is and getting to try new things, and I'm juggling the two. So
super cool.
Yeah, man.
So we're in the studio of the church right now here in downtown Nashville.
Yeah.
And this is an off day for the church. So, and for you. So thank you for spending your time here on the podcast, half a day of your off day. I know you got a kid and you got your family, you got your wife. So thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast and share with us some valuable knowledge on how to actually build a tracks rig, a pro level tracks rig as well. There's a lot of different ways to do it. So we're going to be talking about really the functionality and a lot of the nitty gritty of tracks today. But before we do, can you give us an intro of what is a playback rig? And then number 2, why would I need it?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me, dude. I'm honored to be here. The term playback rig is, I would say, I've been doing this a long time, and I think the church world really has spearheaded a lot of playback. And, way back in the day, we're talking about, I don't know if you remember David Crowder Band.
Oh, yeah,
and
for sure,
their
man.
drummer B-Wack had this website, just B-Wack's Forum. And it was an old school forum. I mean, I'm talking 2003.
Wow, yeah.
And I had Reason, still love Reason, don't use it as much as I wish I did. But that's I would say that's the impetus of how I got into this tech side of music, because I played music, I play bass as my main thing, and produce stuff, so I can kind of dabble. But
yeah, man.
David Crowder Band, they were very not fitting the mold and making sounds and stuff that no one else really was.
Yeah, very unique.
And I loved it. And their album Illuminate, the actual compact disc, for those of you that don't know what that is, look it up. It's a physical CD. It was an enhanced disc, so you could put it in your computer, and it had a demo of Reason with 2 of their songs on it.
Oh, that's super cool.
And that just blew my mind in high school of I can see track by track what they're doing, how they did it.
That is cool.
And so that really, I always say that unlocked it all. That was the start for sure. And so, yeah, man, just all through high school and college, went to Belmont, music production, playing for artists, like the tracks and production and synth and whatever, all that stuff. Supplemental, we'll say, is the category.
Yeah.
All that stuff was definitely like a piece that I want to incorporate with. I'll always just play bass for anyone that asks, and I did, but I can also do this.
Right.
And that went through many changes and iterations. I finally got Ableton. I think I started on, was it 7? I think it was Ableton 7. Again,
Okay.
started with a demo from like a M Audio keyboard, came with a
Right.
disc. Yeah, and just went from there. And I would say another like milestone for me was, once I was here in Nashville, a lot of churches, small and large, all size, all types, all denominations, a lot of them are doing playback and running accompaniment tracks is another
Right.
good word for it. If you're just like, when you hear the word playback, if you're just like, what are you talking about? You could think of it as the evolution of a tape from the old school days, like a cassette tape, accompaniment track, vocal groups.
Right.
That is technically playback. So you're playing back tracks to go along with you in the live performance. And again, I think supplemental is such a great term because my philosophy, it can change. Philosophies change based on the end result and what your goal is and your mission is. But for the most part, no matter what that is, for me, I err on the side of caution with, I don't want it to seem just so fake and hitting play and nothing is what you hear.
Right.
And so there's varying degrees of that, varying levels. And ultimately that comes down to this relationship you have to have with the front of house engineer.
Absolutely.
So like I can send you 32 tracks of all this crazy stuff. And if it's muted, like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There is another component of, I think it also helps musicians like grow and learn and sharpen, like even just the concept of playing with a click.
Absolutely.
And you do that so that you can follow along those tracks. And even if we don't have tracks, like we almost always use a click because it's just easier to stay in time with everybody.
For
And
sure.
there are definitely plenty of moments that we go off script, and if the goal is always you have amazing musicians that can keep time, but it varies so much.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I would say click is number one. And then if you're on that, you can do tracks. And then, just figuring out your why. Like, why do you want the tracks?
Right.
For us with Crosspoint, it traditionally has been like, there's this Nashville culture of music. Like, it is Music City. It is a music town. And we've got in the past too, and now, like, there's so many varying degrees of all the, like, a lot of musicians come to our church, and you have people that either they gig so much that they just want to come and receive,
Right.
and they want to just be in the audience and receive it and not really get involved. And that's usually, I feel like over the years, that's what we see as like the starting point. That's where people start. And there's so many stories of churches other places, and they come here and there's church hurt, but there's also just like needing time off. And
Right.
so we've always, our original music director, there were two guys that me and our current music director were under, that really established like the legacy of how we run our culture here with volunteer musicians. And I love it. So yeah, even just for me personally, I grew so much as a musician coming here and just being around some of these players that are insanely talented.
Amazing.
But yeah, all that to say, like, with all that in mind, like, we've always had this philosophy of, we've got such great musicians, and we're not wanting to view tracks playback as a crutch in any way. Cool. And like I said, click, it's like baseline. But even for the longest time, and for budget is the main reason, we had we call it scrappy setup, where it's like drummers running a click station and that's it. And for many years, it was like we run tracks if I brought my laptop, like no one else did it. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, once I was on staff here, like we got some budget and built some rigs, and you're getting there. So yeah, we're just always trying to drive home. This is a tool. It's not a crutch.
Absolutely.
We want it to supplement. I've said that a lot, but
Yes.
It's from the view too. And we do this with our prep with musicians, is like the record, the MP3 is like North Star. And it's not that we're trying to carbon copy that.
Right.
Because especially in worship music, and when you get into vocals, like no one's going to try to carbon copy the way someone sings, and they're going to put their own thing on it. And especially leading worship, like you're trying to sense the room and feel the Holy Spirit and all those things.
Yes.
So it's not like a perfection pursuit. This is our baseline, and if we all come in here, then we can do something else.
That's good.
It's like we prepare so that we can pivot.
That's good.
is a good thing that we
say that again, man.
we
Say that
prepare
again.
we prepare so that we can pivot.
I love that.
I feel like we've said that. I'm not sure
You
who
can make
coined
some
it.
t-shirts
Yeah.
with that, right?
I'm not sure who exactly coined that. We'll credit somebody else, not me. But yeah, we really stress that with musicians on our team. Prepare so we can pivot. And so we need to have this like baseline of we all come in prepped to this, because some days you may not know anyone else.
Right.
You don't have this like chemistry that you're building up with a band that you play with consistently. It's always like fresh, which is great. And you start to build that over time. Obviously, you play with repeat people, but
Do your musicians have access to the stems?
yeah. So yeah,
helps.
Planning Center obviously is the big resource. The MP3 is always like baseline, but then so that is a big part of my job too, is like resourcing. When we get a new song, we put it in Planning Center. We've got the MP3. Our music director writes a number chart. We do all number charts. We don't do any chords, lyric stuff. It's like Nashville number system.
Absolutely.
Which could be a whole nother podcast, I'm sure.
Right. Talk a little bit about that
Yeah.
just for a second. Why do
don't
you guys
know.
do that
Yeah.
as
So
opposed to lead sheets, sheet music, or
right.
just saying A, D, E?
Yeah.
Why do you guys do
Yeah.
that?
It's this level of professionalism that like we have all varying degrees, and some people do this, some don't, but we do have an audition process. So it's being so big, but we still have to have a standardized level. If I come in knowing the chords, number system, which is scale degrees, not
Right,
chords,
of course.
but in case you don't know, G is your 1 if you're in the key of G, and then you have 2 through 7 all the way up the major scale.
Absolutely.
So if I come in knowing the song is 1, 4, 5, and we need to change the key like morning of, I'm not up the river because I'm just playing 1, 4, 5 in A now.
Boom.
And it's no problem. And I will
Exactly.
say you guys can sound off about bass players, but we got a little easier. I only got to worry about those roots. But yeah, so
That's awesome. No,
but yeah, that's the number chart thing. It's just a way we standardize it with so many campuses and people and teams. We're doing all we can do to standardize everything. So it's like we want all the charts to look the same.
yes.
So it's this song looked crazy, but this one didn't. This was right and this was wrong.
Right.
And we're doing custom arrangements most weeks. So we have some guidelines and rules of when we'll hit a threshold of rebouncing an MP3, for example.
Yeah.
Or if it's like, hey, here's the MP3, but add this or take away this. Or
Right.
we give notes. And it is centrally run. Like we all do the same songs. We're streaming the message. So we have a time window we have to fit in, or we won't get that stream at a campus. We're trying to trend more towards like, how do we work within those parameters? Again, we've prepared, but how can we pivot with the worship set and go where we feel like we want to be led? So again, if all those tools combined, hopefully, are giving us the ability to do that.
That's great.
We've really tried to figure out ways to see how we can trend towards being more flexible.
Mm-hmm.
And again, here's our parameter. We know we have this amount of time. So a big part of the job as band leaders is like, okay, if we've talked about an idea before this service, do I know we have time for that? And like, how do I make that happen, or pivot and not happen, or whatever? And we've come up with plans over the years so we have a campus pastor at every campus, and part of their role, they host the service. So they may be up at the top. They're up usually always after the worship set before we go to stream. And there's been plenty of times that like, we don't have the stream or we lose power. And there's been times that they just have to have a back pocket sermon or something ready to go. And we also, again, we have a broadcast crash plan for music where we've got a couple songs in the Rolodex we put them a different way in Planning Center so it doesn't seem like we're doing it in the set.
Yeah.
But it's like, everyone know this. We can pull this out if we need to. And it's just a click loop. So again, with Playback, it's like something we didn't prep for, something we didn't prepare for, but it's in our back pocket. Right. So our thinking was like, let it just be a click loop, because you're probably going to have to stretch a ton anyway.
Yeah.
So I have that built in my template for every Sunday.
Good.
This song is in here, and it's just a tempo. You could do other songs too.
Right.
But as far as resourcing, we want to make sure all our musicians know, like, we could do this song, just have it ready.
Absolutely.
So yeah, that's pretty recent too. I'm trying to remember when we implemented that. Definitely within the last year. So
that's cool.
But the hope too is like, with all this, it's like you hope that your teams can just rally and pull it off with their talent. And
absolutely.
But
I love that tracks
crazy.
can help you stay on time, right? You're trying to meet a certain time limit. Mm-hmm. And when you're there and you have that exact arrangement, you can prepare and then pivot. So you prep it all, and then it gives you the freedom to pivot if you need to as well.
Yeah.
I love that, and I hope it brings some clarity to some people of why we would use tracks and what it is, the playback rig.
Yeah.
But I know we're going to be talking a lot about the nitty-gritty of the actual equipment and the tactile function of it, and that's what you do a lot of times. We're sitting in front of, if you're watching on YouTube, we're sitting in front of a lot of your rigs. I think you have 3 or 4 rigs right behind us. One that y'all use regularly here at the church, and then some that are smaller and more compact.
Yeah.
So before we get into the nitty-gritty of that behind us here later, you can actually see it. So if you're listening on podcast, you might want to switch over to YouTube for the other half. But tell us a little bit. Some people might be listening from a very small church, 50 people, 100 people, or maybe slightly larger, but they're not multiple campus, and they don't have a ton of resources to just extra spend, and they don't have even the extra time, the extra staff members. Tell us a little bit about different examples of playback rigs that people do use, and also like the prep time. How much time does it take? Some people have misconceptions about that. They say, I have no time.
Right.
How much time do you actually have to dedicate to this every week?
Yeah.
And how much of a learning curve is all this? Can you speak on
Totally
those different levels of playback rigs and how it could be beneficial?
Yeah, man. There's a lot there. So this will, I feel like I left out a little bit with the philosophy piece, and so this will lead to that. I would say, and we've done this too with different campus setups. We've had ones that currently we're in all our own buildings. We've had ones in the past that are like set up, tear down, or in a gym or in a library or whatever.
Right.
I really try to keep the like play to the room in mind when we're doing any kind of setup.
Yes.
So it's, if we're in like this tiny gym that is cavernous and you can't do anything about it, like maybe we don't have like crazy loud drums like going full blast.
Yeah.
Again, with playback, when it comes to that, that is a piece of that too, of like keeping in mind like what feels appropriate for the room and the setup. And again, that's so subjective. But for us, like, I use the word again, I need to maybe have another one, but supplemental is just such the perfect word for it.
Absolutely.
So the smaller a room is and the less you can push the volume, the less tracks I would want as well. And so I would say if you're in a small setup where that is your vibe and you may not even have a full band, it's mostly just you on acoustic, like I would maybe step back and think, is this cool that I'm supplementing with stuff that's not here, or does that seem inauthentic? And again, so subjective. But for me, like, the authenticity piece, it just comes down to musical taste. And like, perk stuff in a track to me is not inauthentic, because all this to say, again, back to front of house, if anything is slamming, it is inauthentic in my opinion. If it is overpowering everything else, that's where you're creeping into that territory. So mixed well, again, so subjective. But for me, I want playback and tracks to be tucked behind the band, supplementing, adding to. And what I was getting at before that I forgot to mention, with our standard being the record, it's like the goal of even doing that stuff is we're trying to make it sonically be as close to the record as possible.
Absolutely.
And again, just as a starting point, it's like we start here, and then I don't think I like the tambourine on the last chorus, we'll mute it, but like we start at that baseline of, and it just helps. It's like front of house can listen to the MP3s just like the musicians in planning center, which novel concept, but like they can find out what the sonic picture we're going for is.
Right.
Now, again, people could do that, but if we haven't committed to that process, obviously it doesn't benefit you. But that is our kind of philosophy. And I think that comes from Music City, like Gig Town, like that usually is the goal with artists too. It's we're trying to recreate the record, and genres change that, musicians change that, whatever. But that's usually the starting point. And then you deviate and like, how can we make a cool live version? But like those tracks are still in there. There's so much to that. So to answer your question, with differing sizes of churches, I would say that should be your barometer of start with the room and the setup and the volume.
Right.
And your front of house and your mix and what is valuable to you in those scenarios. And again, it's so subjective. There may be a guy who like just plays acoustic and he's running tracks and it sounds awesome and everyone thinks it's great and it doesn't feel inauthentic. It's just, that's music. That's the beauty of subjectivity.
A few practical questions.
Yeah.
So if we were to categorize this, 3 different categories of playback rigs. One being the very entry level. I'm talking about you have even a phone app, iPad, or computer, and you're going out a headphone jack, and you're splitting just clicking cues on one channel, tracks on the other. Okay, so that's level 1. And then the second tier, maybe you're using an interface now, which hopefully is
Right.
better for latency and the quality. You're using a simple interface, and maybe you're doing stereo tracks now
Right.
and splitting out the click and cues, and you have 4 outs.
Yeah.
And then you get into anything pro level, which is what you're doing primarily, and probably what you guys operate under, and including redundancy. Can you talk about the practicalities of level 1, 2, and 3?
Yeah.
And like, when should you be using
Yeah.
level 1, 2, and 3? How do you know
For sure.
where you should, when and where you should be using that?
Yeah. Let's be real. Like, the biggest barrier is money.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
budget is number one. And so I think there's a lot of education that I feel like isn't super out there in the playback world of the value of why these rigs are the prices they are, especially in Nashville. It's like a lot of people, everyone has a laptop. Most people can get some kind of audio interface. And there's this gap of that's all I need. But depending on your setup and what you want to do and how robust you want it to be,
Talk about that some more, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
that may be limiting yourself.
Yeah, for sure.
So yeah, we'll go back to the levels. So
Yes, sir.
level 1, like you were saying, and that's what we did back in the day. Dude, back in the day, oh my gosh, we used to literally run tracks out of Pro Presenter. Do not do this. Please don't do this. It is not made for that. And we've got great media operators, but like, they're at front of house. They don't have click in their ears. We are on stage and we're just sitting there waiting for them to hit play. And the amount of times that like, because it was a lot of times that was the easiest way to have it with a video. And you just play the video that has audio that goes to us.
Yes.
Bro, the amount of times that like we had so many fails. Click the video again, clicked another video that had Spotify dubstep music playing while this was playing. Like, it's crazy.
Oh, no.
So that, I think, is like the value of Ableton. This is a DAW, digital audio workstation, music software that is designed. It's literally called Ableton Live. Ableton's the company, Live is the app. It couldn't be more designed for this, right?
Absolutely.
And you can do so much more with it. Ableton has really, they're a German company. Like, there's so much other stuff there. And a lot of like records are now produced in it. It's been the underdog. Pro Tools is still king in this town, but it's, I think, pretty universally indisputable. I haven't run into many people that are like, that is not what we should use for playback.
Yeah.
But again, there's barriers to that. So like, you have a laptop, you've got an interface, but Ableton costs money. And there may be other like plugins you want to use that cost money. So reality of it is, yeah, budget's number one. But what I find so many times with people is maybe realize what you can get for an amount of money until you see it. And unless you're like really in this world, like microscope, looking at tons of stuff, oh, I could do that for this much, that's worth it. It's an investment. And a lot of artists, like, we always talk about, I sympathize with drummers in this town because not just here, like it really is pretty universal, I'd say, at church and other places, but the drummer, man, is just the guy. The drummer is just, he's the one that's going to run playback. And so many drummers do it amazing, but there's this expectation of so many artists that are coming up and they're like, don't you just have a rig? Don't you have a rig? This is your career.
You're right.
And so that's the gaps I'm trying to fill where, you know, again, it's just an investment. It's as a drummer, like I'm trying to get gigs and I feel like it's valuable for me to have a rig that may get me a gig over another guy. That's great. But at some point, depending on your philosophy, if tracks are so vital to your show, and with artist stuff, it can be much more. And tons of churches do this too. We, again, err on the side of like more minimal. But if you're running lighting, if you're running time code for videos, if you're running like your whole show, this is the brain. And if it goes down, your show's done. Again, our hope is that's not the case. You've got your musicians. It'll still be great. But you've, as an artist or whatever, you've seen the value of this is the kind of show I want to present. And it goes all back to that, giving them the sound that you want. Huge artists, like some of those you mentioned, like they're running, like there's a playback tech, and that's a new thing maybe.
I want you guys to hear that. There are playback techs that get paid to go on tour as another musician or audio engineer, however they want to.
And you know, you can, and I've done it here. There's been a few events that like, man, I don't need to play. Let me run playback side stage. And again, it just gives you that kind of security blanket of I'm following along. I'm a musician, so I know what we're doing. We've talked about it before, but I'm like able to ebb and flow and do things musically. Everyone else is doing things musically on stage. I'm following that, and you're not trying to Inspector Gadget it. So
yeah.
it's a dance, man. That being said, and all that, like for us at Crosspoint, it is that. It is, I've built systems we just don't have a system yet for playback text off stage. Right. So yeah, we used to do Pro Presenter. Don't do that. If you're at the bare bones, I don't even want to say I recommend doing a headphone jack situation, because now things have come so far. Even interfaces are so cheap that I just am like, man, I don't see the value in doing that for the audio quality. There's just so many reasons. And like, you can get a 4-channel interface for so cheap. So absolutely. I really try to preach that as if you got nothing else, like you could buy a Scarlett 2i2. Really? They're like $80. $80. Whatever it is now.
So I want you guys to hear that. It's not worth just doing the headphone out.
That's my opinion. Get the interface. That's my opinion. The
headphone cable is what, $20. You can just get a nice interface.
I'll make you one. I'll make you a cable if you want a cable.
There you go.
But yeah, I just personally, if you're asking me like that, I would say, man, we can do better.
That's good.
But even with, say, some people used to do this like with an iPad. It's like most iPads now with iOS, I don't know which version it started with, but you can run audio interfaces natively. If you don't have an expensive laptop, but your iPad can do it, like you can still get an interface and get those multiple outs. Yeah. For me, the bare minimum then would be like click and then stereo tracks.
Got you.
Just for audio quality, and when you separate the click, you can send it to only your ears, obviously, not the house, and then all that. So a couple examples at that level. Multitracks.com has an app called Playback.
Right.
Great, aptly named. I personally have not used it a ton because obviously we're Team Ableton here. I've dabbled in it, and we entertained the idea of it for like student setups, but all our student setups are in the same room, so we just share everything. And then Loop Community, another website that sells multitracks.
Absolutely.
They also have an app called Prime. Prime is great. Like, they're basically the same thing as far as what I have seen. Functionality wise, I feel like they can do all the same things, and they're always updating them. Absolutely. Again, I don't keep up with that, but I feel like Prime maybe is a little lower learning curve, less steep learning curve. So if you're asking me like bare bones, Scarlett interface, iPad with Prime, that's going to put you at least in a better spot to where
for sure
you can control a lot more than you would think, and you're not having to just play tracks out of QuickTime. And Prime is great because it gives you all that control. You can change keys. You can adjust the levels. Like
you can repeat sections. You can do your own arrangements.
Yes.
You can extend the click.
You can upload whatever you want.
You have a pads player.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And unlike multi-tracks, you can actually buy community tracks from other producers
and
that do a good job.
Yeah.
And it'll be a lot cheaper. I'm a big fan of the Prime Playback now. And it doesn't take up as much CPU. You can play it on an iPad now. Works flawless because iPad CPU is incredible these days. You know what I'm saying?
It's insane. Yeah, again, budget. Like, those are great tools. But again, it's this level of we've committed to Ableton.
Right.
It's the standard. There was stuff you couldn't do back in the day. So it was like, okay, we have to do Ableton.
Right.
Those apps have come such a long way. But yeah, once you're like in that world, I'm fast at it. I'm comfortable in the DAW. I don't think there's many things that I wouldn't be able to do in Ableton that I could do in those apps. But again, I think that's why I say they're great tools for those stepping stones. And
absolutely.
Yeah. So that's like level, I would say 1/2. And then like 3 and maybe 4 is like some of these rigs, because there's so many parts and pieces to these rigs. That's okay.
Most church people don't know about the other possibilities.
Yeah.
So inform us, teach us, man. What are some of the ways that we can up the level of production with these rigs that you have?
Yeah. The traditional thing is like a rack with a laptop, and that's like a fly rig. And that is outside of the church world. That's it. That is the thing. That's what I build mostly. But if there's an application or a setup that we can have, there's a lot of advantages to that. So again, this may or may not be someone's setup, but because we have our own buildings, we have all our gear on the stages, which is great.
Yeah.
We're not setting up and tearing down. So we don't have a tech director on staff at every campus. A lot of churches do that, and there's so much value in that.
Right.
But we're still running a lot of it with volunteer and then centrally. So like my responsibility is the Ableton session and the rigs for all the campuses. And so over the years, we figured out ways. So like I said, the evolution of starting in Pro Presenter, then I would bring my laptop, and that would just be the one place. But we were a lot, consistently doing Pro Presenter everywhere, running tracks. It was horrible. And that's going to be the takeaway is don't use it for track. But no shade to ProPres. It's just not built for that.
Right.
It's great at everything else. So the evolution of that was, again, once we had the budget, it was let's build a playback rig that lives on the stages, is always plugged in.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, it's okay, if we did laptops, how are we going to maintain these? I'm going to have to, and some people do this, and there's a system that can work. Again, for us and our personnel and our scenario, I didn't see a way to make it like possible without huge headaches and problems. Like I've seen other churches where it's if they have a staff person, they come centrally during the week and drop the laptop off and you upload it and then take it back, whatever. But I just was like, man, we have Dropbox, we have the internet. Let's just use this let's have a desktop computer that's always on the stage. I can remote in, control it, do all that.
That's good.
This was so like 2018 Mac Mini was like the revamp where it finally got like pro level specs.
Oh, nice.
Before that they were garbage. Like they could get by on some stuff, but just not built for music world and production.
Absolutely.
So at the time it was like, man, I just don't think we can do the Mac Mini, even though you can put it in a rack, it's just better. It doesn't have a screen. We can make it however we want. We were like budget too, like cheap, like pricing wise, let's get iMacs. So it's funny looking back, it worked, but we built wooden like carts. We didn't have metal racks. There was no rack rails because all it was is iMac, and we literally, don't tell Apple, we drilled through the stand so that we could bolt the iMac to the cart. And it was, at the time it was like, this is so sick. But things have come a long way. We'll say that. It's like these types of rigs I feel like did not exist then. Right. So for better or worse, that was it. And audio wise, with our front of house engineer at the time on staff, we were using Dante. And so literally our audio is just Cat 5 to the iMac. Dante Virtual Sound Card is an app that's our interface, and you can have up to 64 channels. Very easy rig to build. It was great for us. I mounted the keyboard and trackpad. Everything's stuck down, bolted. Yeah. And you just have the one cable. We did the power, little simple loom of just like power extension and Cat 5. And that was it for many years. No soldering involved. Right. Me and our front of house guy helped me with that, but there wasn't much to it. So I'm not going to necessarily recommend that. Again, drilling in an iMac, but there just are there's many better ways to do it now, but that got us by for a long time. And it was great because we had really good computers that could handle it. And I could remotely manage all of that and use an app called Apple Remote Desktop. And so again, I'm making the sessions and I'm making one for every campus. And so then I would just remotely open them. And so when you show up on Sunday, Ableton's open, ready to go. We've trained guys on how to use it, but I've worked so hard on my template even, which is another whole episode, of as few button pushes as possible. Like I always shoot for our lowest common denominator, and because we have all these varying skill levels, right? And there's only so much we can do with training, and we've done so much training over the years. I train all the time, not as much as I probably should. It's hard, and it's that thing where I've found with a lot of people, like, I can show you this, and seeing it in person goes such a long way. So many people, I think myself included, are visual learners. Right. But if the only time Ableton is Sunday morning when you show up, it's just, you're going to have a ceiling of like how much you can get really comfortable. So our best playback engineers, we'll call them playback techs, are like people who have a rig or have Ableton and do that for their gig, or record in Ableton, and like they produce songs in Ableton, and it is their main DAW, like it is for me. So all that to say, that was that step with the iMacs and the cart. I could try and find a picture and see if we get any laughs. It was again great at the time. This was 2015, I think. And then eventually, computers don't last forever. We wanted to get rid of this big iMac, be a little more discreet, but we got these metal racks with rack rails and put them, again, the Mac Minis were updated starting in 2018. So I think we got them in 2018, maybe 19. And put them in a rack. Again, still doing Dante. So it's in a rack, and we got custom rack panels made. Those where I first dove into rack panel stuff. And the advantage of that is like all your ins and outs are going to one place. Yeah. and you're not having to dig through cables and plug into interfaces and do all this stuff, which again, for Dante, there's not much to it.
Right.
But we put some other stuff in there, to things we found over the years. But yeah, that's the current setup, and it's evolved many times.
How do you know when to make a rig that's just a Pelican case, simple, easy for the like a mobile rig, similar to what I have here that people can't see on camera, versus an actual rack metal?
Again, it's the environment for us. There's very few. I've only built maybe 2 of these types of rigs for another church that was like, we have a similar thing where it's just going to live on stage. That's definitely way less common. Like I said, there's many advantages. Like, they're always on. I'm maintaining them. They're always good to go. They're always in sync. So it's a great thing. And yeah, you're eliminating all setup teardown.
Right.
Like, it is all there, plugged in, always ready to go.
Yes.
So yeah, it's the room and the setup. So if you're a setup teardown church, I don't know if, now that being said, we did with our Hendersonville campus when it launched. We were in a school, and I basically made a more mobile version of this rig. And you can get these custom made, which would probably be better, but I found like a mixer rack case. So it's got rack rails on the front and on the top. And the top was great because then I could put like blank rack panels and mount the keyboard and trackpad to that, and then mount the monitor to that. And then it all closed up so that we can put it away in the closet during the week.
Nice.
So there was some setup, tear down with that. But again, just Dante and power. So we literally had a loom, and it's on the rack panel labeled. You just plug in power, plug in Cat 5, you're good to go. And that could get tricky for the remote side with Dropbox, because we had internet, but sometimes it was finicky.
Right.
But yeah, I would say that's the advantage of a networked system, is like everything is synchronized and there is no like airdropping sessions.
Absolutely.
And that is what happens a lot with laptops.
I've made my own playback rig before, because I have the Focusrite 18920, and I got the 8 outs, and I can split the tracks, and used it for DNOWs and worship services. Still do. But I have a DNOW in January that I just ran everything through this interface and ran everything out separately. Got all the bass content on one mono channel. The other stuff, tracks, stereo out. Percussion was a mono channel. Click and cues were separate. So I think there were 6 total outputs that I sent to the board. And that's medium level. And then I was using the Prime app to run it. Which can't say enough great things. And Prime is actually, it was controlled by a MIDI controller. And so you can press play, fade out, stop, tempo markers. The first octave as my pad's drone mapped to Prime. And Prime's come a long way. And you can actually repeat the same section. I have some cue markers on the MIDI that you can MIDI map everything in the app.
Oh, yeah. Again, this could be a whole nother thing, but there's a script app called AbleSet.
AbleSet.
Very similar to everything you just described, but allowing it in Ableton.
That's cool.
I've used it a few times. I'm still really diving in, and it doesn't, again, I'm always thinking like simple for us on Sundays, 6 campuses. But yeah, for artists and people that have the same session, that like you're diving in and getting really detailed with everything you're controlling.
Absolutely.
It's sick. I mean, it can do, and you can put it on a network. The window actually pops up in Safari, and you have your set list laid out. You can rearrange your set list. It's all based on Ableton locators. You can loop any section. You can run pads. You can do dynamic cues, which are, if you loop something, the cue for the next section mutes. So you're not hearing like a bridge because we're still in the chorus. And then when you move on, you can get real granular and type in lyrics, do lighting cues, like all that stuff. And the network thing with AbleSet is really cool because once it's on a network, I have a rental rig here that I rent out, and I've got a router with that for if people want to dive into this. It's not like I don't have it like pre-set up because it's all on your computer. There's not a computer with it. But yeah, you can make this AbleSet network, not connected to internet, and then any device can just type in the IP address and get on it, and you can customize the views per device. So similar thing.
That's
it's like,
cool, man.
Which I did it at a camp last summer.
That is neat.
This past summer, where we're just running it. We're not syncing anything out. It's all just throw and go. But the Pro Presenter op, new guy, he's just throwing it together for camp. DNOWs, that's how it goes. But he's also, for whatever reason in the room, he's like very back corner in the loft. Dude can't see what's going on. So we were like, can we give him, like, can he get on this? And it's like 100%. So he pulled up his laptop. And same thing, he had they call it performance view. I don't know what the other one's called. So like I can set it to where I'm the only one in control.
Got you.
But he can just view it, and I can customize everything he views.
That is awesome.
So it's it'll even do a visual click where it's like green bars, 1, 2, 3, 4, highlights the section you're on. So that was a
That
lifesaver
is
for
super
him
cool.
because now he can follow the lyrics and know where we're going.
That is super cool.
Yeah.
And say that again. How can people set that up?
Is the name of it. Yeah. And
Get
it's
that app.
yeah, check it out. It's like I said, I feel like I've only scratched the surface.
Right.
And again, all this stuff takes a lot of prep work. Now my rental rig is this company, Savant Playback, is a company in town that makes amazing stuff, and I use their racks. They also build rigs, very similar. But yeah, they sell a lot of these parts and components, so it's really great. And so that Nano rack it's not a separate panel, it's just built into the chassis. So all the
Awesome.
you'll see when we show it. But yeah, I think, like I was saying, you've got a rig at its heart is some sort of enclosure. Usually it's a rack because we all have rack gear. That is another advantage of the Savant stuff is over the years, multiple companies have figured out like there's a mounting screw on this interface and it's the Play Audio 12 by iConnectivity. By far the most like game-changing popular playback audio interface. It's not a rack. It's a half rack, but that's great because you can mount it with a screw and it's like super secure.
Yeah.
And so his racks have all these pre-drilled holes for basically any configuration that you can think of.
That's awesome.
And they're aluminum. So if you do want to do something different, it's not hard to drill into it. I've done it many times.
That's good.
So it's like at its heart, interface, rack of whatever kind. And the rack stuff, again, if we're really starting from scratch, it's like mounted so it's secure. That's the whole advantage of like rack gear.
Yeah.
So then a rack panel on the back is, all this is in the interest of, you can go two routes here. And I think the danger with rig building, and I think we see this more in the pedal board world, is like aesthetic over function. Oh. And I even had to learn that. It took me a while to be like, I'm going to run this cable this way because it looks awesome, but did I actually solder the cable? Yeah. And that's a growing pain of learning how to build stuff. And again, you're taking from all these other people, and a lot of guys just build pedal boards, and that's a whole thing. And I feel like I'm taking bits and pieces from like this type of rig building and playback rigs and keys rigs and pedal boards. And here's what I'm figuring out works and doesn't work. A lot of times aesthetic, where does that line up with functionality? Because they don't have to oppose each other. And figuring out that balance of rig building. And so, yeah, the rack panel is like in the effort of sending everything to the back. Again, just aesthetically on stage, whether it's seen or not, even just for cleanliness, and especially if you're throw and go at a festival and it's crazy, like
absolutely,
you want it to be as simple and robust as possible. So I don't want to set my rack out and be plugging in a million things. And what if I did it wrong? And what if we don't have time for sound check? And so the more that you can eliminate having to always set up every time. Again, this is a live scenario. So
I love this, man.
Mobile recording rigs and stuff like this, that's a different world. That is inherent in like the setup, obviously. So now there's advantages to still doing it with a recording rig. That actually is the Ed Sheeran thing you mentioned is a recording rig for him, not a live playback thing.
Oh, really?
For one of his collaborators. So they're using that, at least what he told me, is they're using that like on the road, like recording demos. And it's just like this rack that has everything they need. He wanted to put he mailed me all his gear. And so it's like his little Genelec speakers that are tiny, 2 SM7s, all the cables. I made them to go in there, made extensions, and it's all like in a custom foamed setup. So it's like everything they need to record on the go.
That's sweet.
So even that, it's like the rack panel, I would argue, gives you a ton of advantage there because you're only having to plug in the things you need to plug in. You're not scrambling. But yeah, it's amplified in the live setting. It's a lot of guys who gig, and again, festivals, it's like if you've done that stuff, like it can be crazy. They can be custom. So like people can do whatever they want. Right. And I've had people who like, guys who like have started it and yeah, but I want you to make the cables. Like, here's what I want. Totally. If it's like you're trusting me to give you what I think is great, I err on the side of everything that is pluggable on a rig is plugged in and going to the panel.
Yeah.
And even if you don't use it, you could in the future. It's future proofing is what we call it. A lot of times people it's again, budget. So I just need the bare minimum. Like I'm only using 4 outputs, but this is a 12 output interface. I'm like, what if you want to use more one day?
Right.
Don't sell yourself short here. And then when you need that 5th output one day, you're going to have to get in there and it's going to be a pain.
Yeah.
So I think the value is just set it up where it's all there. You don't have to use all of it, but you have the future proofing ability to use all of it. And yeah, some of these interfaces, it's like, again, unless there's a plan otherwise, that's what I'm doing, where even the USB, even the MIDI, like if it's pluggable, I'm trying to send it to the back panel.
That's good.
And that's my approach. So again, same thing for any rig. I just think the value of the cleanliness of that, the time it saves you, the headache, but also there is a reality of like ports and wear and tear. So if you're plugging in, especially these, so the Play Audio 12 is pretty notorious. They're extinct now. We can mourn about that. I'm pretty upset. Oh. So if you have one, you've got gold. You're sitting on a gold mine, put it on eBay, I'll buy it. But these are notorious for the USB ports because these have been around since, gosh, I think it was, I'm going to get it wrong. I think it was maybe 2012 or something.
Wow.
But they're USB 2.0, which again, this is an interface that is designed for playback. So there's no inputs. You can't record anything with this interface. It's designed for redundant playback. So it's only outputs. Yeah, for that and latency, you're not really dealing with latency and like recording and all that stuff. So like
Absolutely.
USB 2.0 is plenty of bandwidth for that. So it stayed that way for a long time. But those USB ports are just on a circuit board in there, and over time, throw and go again, like wear and tear. Like every time you plug that in and out, you're gonna wear it down. Yeah, all
That's
that to say
thing.
that goes for the audio cables too. Again, my philosophy is if it's already plugged in, we're preserving the life of that so much longer. And I'd much rather have the cable I made go bad than like your port, and you have to send it in to get repaired. And yeah, that was a long thing
good,
about
man.
rack panels.
No, I love it. We want to hear it, man.
Yeah, we could get into redundancy and all that if you want. But
absolutely.
The eye connectivity, Play Audio 12 is a whole. It's a whole thing, man.
Dude, it's a whole new world. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, because we talked a little bit about tracks on the Worship Keys podcast here, and tracks are important. But to actually talk to a pro like you, who you do this all the time, just great conversations and good tips that you've given. Can you tell us about Stephen Chris Chapman's rig? Because you shared a little bit about Ed Sheeran's. It was his recording rig. I know we have a lot of Stephen Chris Chapman fans listening to the podcast, and I love Stephen Chris Chapman too. Tell us about that. When did you do that, and what all did that entail, man?
Yeah, I have known people in his camp for quite a bit. I have a couple buddies that. One buddy I went to Belmont with, and he's his front of house engineer. And then I got to know I guess we haven't talked in a while. I guess he's his monitor / now playback tech, which was a new role. But yeah, he hit me up. They have never done click before his whole career. Stephen Curtis Chapman is an insane musician.
Crazy good.
Ridiculous. His sons in Colony House, they're insane, dude. So good. One of my favorite drummers of all time. Yes. Will Franklin.
Yes.
But yeah, they're great. I guess his whole career, according to them, he's never used click. And so they were doing this.
Incredible.
Yeah. And there's some stuff that, like, his timing is so good that you don't need it. But for this tour, I guess there was a lot of video elements. They have their charity, Show Hope. It was a Show Hope tour. But it was just a different setup. But I think it really was driven by the video elements. Again, at the time, the Play Audio was not discontinued yet. So that's the standard. And that gives him in a fly rack that's carry on if it needs to be. His is pretty bare bones. So just audio interface, again, all 12 outputs, all other ports connected that would be needed on the rack panel. And then PowerCon is a big thing that I preach about. It's a type of power connector. So like IEC, not AC. That's a Ableton thing. We could go down. But IEC is like your standard, like 3-prong. Right. Most gear has that. But PowerCon is just a different connector. So you can chop that off, just make a new connector. And the beauty of that is it can plug into a rack panel. It's got a panel mount connector. So with all your XLR outs and whatever you have on the panel, that can also be on the panel. And it's twist lock, which is just great. So a lot of pro gear, like production stuff has that. Most LED walls, lighting, like they're all using PowerCon.
Yes.
There's systems to go in and out through daisy chain, all that. So I do some of that on these rigs.
Very important.
So yeah, power for that, USB ports for the computers, all the XLR outputs, and then the Play Audio. I think if you know about that interface, you're like, this is redundancy. We actually don't run redundant on Sundays because my hope was that our computers are good enough, whatever, knock on wood. I would say if it's more a setup like that where like your whole show is built on this, the video, everything's running from the brain of this playback rig, you want to have redundancy in case something goes wrong. So when it came out, this interface was like, there really was nothing else like it. And it basically puts a redundant setup that used to take like 4U of rack gear into one half rack.
That's good.
Essentially, plus or minus a few things, but makes it really easy. And so that's why I think it just skyrocketed. So yeah, that's his setup. Yeah, man, that was cool to get that.
Cool.
I think from what I heard, it all went well. I made him an
That's
XLR snake for the outputs too. Just again, one less thing. So for a lot of these, there's multiple ways to do it, but usually it's XLR outputs. And so you can show up and just have sound guy plug in, or you can, again, if you value, let me get a snake that I know is made hopefully perfectly. That's eliminating one more thing of I'm not going to have bad cables. So there's all those things. And when like we were saying earlier, when I do a rig, it's here's the rig, here's the options, here's add-ons, here's Ableton Consulting. These are all things that I just want to offer. And hey, how's it going? I'm Seth from Seth Builds Rigs. And yeah, we just want to show you guys a few different examples of some playback rigs and a keys rig. Some of this is really standard stuff that I'm building for artists, and some of it is very tailor-made to Crosspoint and the church world. So yeah, we hope a lot of this can inspire you guys to get a rig like this if it makes sense for your church or your gig or whatever. We talked about this before, but this is like my rolling rack playback rig, and this one is a little unique. This is at our Nashville campus where we broadcast from. So it's got a few more components than what we have at our campuses, but visually pretty similar to what we have at our 5 other campuses. And those are all just running same rack, same screen, same keyboard, trackpad, Mac Mini in a rack, but just on Dante virtual sound card like we talked about before. But then this one, because it's broadcast and we don't use it every Sunday, but for special events or stuff, we will sometimes use the Play Audio 12 because of its redundancy capabilities. So yeah, this is, there's 2 Mac Minis in this rack. Again, like 90% of the time, we're just on computer A, and haven't found a great way that I love to have a second screen, keyboard and trackpad. It's a lot. So I've got a KVM switcher, which is keyboard and mouse. So the keyboard and trackpad just plug in here, and if we go to computer B, you just have to watch for it, but there's a light for A, and you'll see the screen goes black, and the keyboard, trackpad, and screen will switch to computer B. And so even on the wallpaper, just a little helpful thing there is I made the wallpaper, named the computer, so it's tracks B, and then if we go back, takes a second, and you'll see it says tracks A. So yeah, if we're running redundant, that's how we would do it. I mean, I could even unplug this or on the rack panel, plug in my laptop instead of using that second Mac Mini. But yeah, Mac Mini A is always the main. And yeah, we can talk about this now. The redundancy thing, there's several different ways. You have your A computer, your B computer. This interface has 2 USB. Again, you have the same session on both computers. And the way you control them both at the same time, one way to do it, there are multiple ways, is to plug into this USB host port on the interface. And so you could take a MIDI controller like this, or any MIDI controller. We've got a Morningstar pedal down here, but that's plugged in here. So if I have the same session open on both and I hit play, it's going to hit play on both machines. And then consequently, every other action I take is following on the second machine. So that's a super quick version of that. Like I said, we've got all those components in here. We have a battery backup in the rack, so in case it gets unplugged from power, because it's a Mac Mini, if you lose power on your laptop, it doesn't instantly die because it's got a battery. Mac Minis do not, so this kind of alleviates that. And then yeah, this is really cool. This is the Morningstar MC6. It's a MIDI controller foot switch that is really popular in the guitar world, but it's also just so great for Ableton. And yeah, some of the things I love is that it's got a screen so you can light up the labels. It's easy to see. And yeah, you can just map these to any MIDI function you want. I also have a expression pedal here, and that is mapped to the way my session is set up. All my faders are on return tracks, so all my outputs to front of house, I can control the level of those with this volume pedal. And it's just a nice feature to have if things go wrong and you don't want tracks to just die immediately. You can try to be musical and fade it out and fade it back in. We've also messed around with just doing that with a button push. There's multiple ways to do it. That's the beauty. But yeah, these have been really nice to have that set up really quick. I'll show the back. This is the really simple version, but this is an old rack panel that I've just updated. We have all the analog outs going to a multi-pin. That's a whole nother thing that we could talk about. But versus XLR outputs, they're all going to this multi-pin connector, and it's a whirlwind. So we have a fan out cable that plugs in here and then fans out to XLR. So we use that if we're using the Play Audio 12. But then, like I said, 90% of the time we're just on Dante. So we've got this cable loom that is PowerCon and EtherCon. So the Ethernet cable locks in, power locks in, everything's nice and secure. So yeah, and then USB ports for the MC6 and whatever else you want. But yeah, man, that's all self-contained there. Good example of a rack panel. Moving on, this is a playback rig for an artist I'm working on. I wanted to show this because this is like the new standard. So we mentioned before that unfortunately the Play Audio 12 was discontinued. I'm very sad about it. I just love options, so I'm not against this. I just wish I could have both. So we've got the half rack size and now it's full rack, and they've updated some stuff. It's great. But yeah, it's USB-C now for the computer. It's got the same controls. They've added MIDI in and out. It's got that same host port, so I can plug in a controller, control both computers. And then it's all XLR outs on the back. Again, rack panel. I'm routing those XLR outs and connecting them to the rack panel. And yeah, we'll go ahead and show it. So this is the back. Yeah, and so this is a 3U rack panel. This is in the Savant fly rack called the 0G. Fits in this carry-on. It's awesome. And everything, it's an aluminum rack, so your rack gear can mount on the rails. And if you have other gear, you can mount it to the rack itself, which I've done a lot for certain configurations. But yeah, similar setup, man. AC in for power, it's PowerCon. I jumped that to a white PowerCon out, which lets you daisy chain. This is just like a bonus I kind of throw in unless we just can't fit it. And it's a power strip, so just to give you a little extra power if you need it. And then yeah, this one is set up pretty standard. So again, under construction, so we're missing a MIDI connector here. But yeah, on this side I have power and connections, and then the XLR all on the right side. So this interface is 14 outs if you use them all. So 14 XLR outs, leaving some blank spaces for future proofing if you ever want to add or change anything. And then we've got USB-C and USB 2 for all the interface. I also include cables, Mac power. We've got a charger in here that's mounted to the rack, so you can power 2 laptops, one on each of these, and then the 2 computers, USB-C on these, and then whatever controller if you choose to plug in there. And then again, just making everything available. It's got a Cat5 port for RTP MIDI, which is a network you can use to connect iConnectivity devices. That's a whole other thing. And then they've added the MIDI in and out, so just, yeah, pushing those back here. And then these are TRS inputs, so you can plug in like an AB foot switch, and you can manually switch between A and B if you want to do that. I think most people just do it automatically. There's a plug-in, and it will just do it for you. But again, you just have that ability if you need it. So yeah, that's the standard one there. I really love it. This is where we're going to be going, unless, like I said, unless you can find a PA12, but this is a great interface, lots of connectivity on it. And yeah, just all in a custom foamed Pelican with all the cables you need in there, what we can fit. That's carry-on size. And similar to that, moving right down the line, we've got my rental rig, which is Savant calls it the Nano rack, and they still sell them because there is other half rack gear. You can do a lot of things with this, even though the Play Audio. But yeah, I love this. It's basically half size of this, same Pelican. There's a separator in the middle, custom foamed. And then I like it for this rental rig because then I can include all the cables in an XLR snake and have more room. So all the stuff's in one side, the rack's on the other side. And again, everything's plugged in. The control ports aren't because we ran out of space quickly. There's 16 on the back here. But then to get the last 2 outputs 11 and 12, I made this little adapter cable. So it splits out to XLR from the headphones. That's where your outputs are for the Play Audio 12. 11 and 12 are on that. So then 1 through 10 are the XLR here. And then, yeah, including the same thing, PowerCon through with a little power strip. And then Mac Power, one port for that. Again, didn't have space to do two, but then hopefully you would, if you're running B computer, you can just power it however you need to. Host port, and then the B for USB-B, including all those cables in this rig. And we can show it. Maybe open the lid here. So yeah, everything goes in here. It's pretty great. Extra power con, but yeah, the rack will go in here. All the cables go in here. And yeah, it's a great little rental rig. Yeah, moving down the line. So this is another Crosspoint rig. Before it actually, yeah, it happened a little before these came out and popular and available, the aluminum racks from Savant. So this is a custom rack. If you guys have heard of OCD Labs, they're a rig company in Franklin. This is like my poor man's OCD rig. They came up with this Rhino liner coating. It's similar to like a truck bed liner. It's really great because it's just so rugged. It's not just like bare wood. I really love it. It's super durable. But it is a wood rack sprayed with that stuff. And the goal here was get a Mac Mini rig. And so again, a lot of trial and error with the Pelican and what would fit and what screen and all this stuff. And yeah, so it's not a redundant computer rig. Again, you could plug in a laptop. I've done it as your B computer, but I've just got one Mac Mini in the rack and that's labeled there. And then this side, I can't take off to show you, so I don't know if you can see through the holes, but I was able to fit a Play Audio 12 in here, which is pretty insane. So yeah, maybe you wanna, so that interface, I jammed in there and it works. It fits perfectly. And again, I plugged in everything and routed it to the back. So the only thing you're really losing is the visual of the front panel, and all that stuff you can control in the app on your computer. I don't know many people that are doing these. They're touch buttons, not the best anyway. Yeah, you give that up to get back some space, and we could obviously fit some more stuff, but just found value in this and it worked really well, and you just set it up, and it's like our mobile rigs at our campuses. It's like you set it up and it's good to go. It's on Dropbox. I can sync to it. There's no transferring of sessions. It just has to download. So yeah, just for overheating, if it's used in the sun, I put this little rack fan in here. No data on whether that does much or not. It was a nice little bonus. It's thin, it fits great. So the cool thing about this rig, keyboard and trackpad are mounted here. And then this screen, so I'll go ahead and just do the teardown. So yeah, we'll shut down the computer. And then this screen, I've got it labeled here, but you plug in, shows you where to plug in, and then there's a little tab that slides off. Yeah, that's where you plug in. This is the top, this is where you're sliding. And I found this little monitor mount, so that slides on and off of there, and then it folds flat. And then this is all flatter now, so it can fit in the rack and the Pelican better. Let's show the back a little bit. Got PowerCon as well. So this is a different type of panel. I would say I'm not a huge fan of this anymore. Again, some learning here, but it's great. If you have an enclosed rack like this, there is some value to having a hinged panel. And so I did that on this just because, I don't think I showed it really, but with the Savant rack, you can take the lid off and you can get in there, do maintenance. It's really great. So this obviously is a little, and that's more like most racks I would say are like this. They're a little more closed off. This is a nice little hack. Got some thumb screws, which you can also tighten with a screwdriver. I used to try to put a screwdriver in there, but can't fly with that. This isn't carry-on, you have to check this. But again, that's the value of the Mac Mini. So again, in a pinch, you can get in here. It's got this latch. That is closed, but I like the security of the thumb screws. But then you just flip this and you're inside. So yeah, I just went a little crazy with cables, but everything's mounted and nothing's coming undone. A few less things that I've updated over the years, but same thing, man. Yeah, 12 outs that work. And that's just everything's mounted to inside that. That's the Sonnet Mac Mini rack. Everything's mounted to that. And then some other power strip and components are mounted on top of it. But yeah, this has been a really great rig. Wouldn't use it a ton, but if we have a travel date or Even if we just want to be more mobile than dragging the rack off the stage, like we can just throw and go this. I use it mainly a lot for like video shoots, stuff like that. So yeah, it's pretty great. And then just round it out here, goes in this Pelican. But then I've got this for the screen, and you zip it up, and power cable would also fit in there. And then your rack is done. So yeah, that's the Mac Mini rig. Moving on. That's all the Playback rigs. Let me know if you guys have questions about any of it. Happy to answer. I did want to show this Keys rig. Been working on these for a while. We've had a lot of versions of Keys rigs over the years. And our current setup before these was a main stage rig. Those Mac Minis, before they were good, we had the bad ones with main stage. And so we were using Sunday keys, which I'm sure you guys have talked about. And it's great because it's a template, it's easy, it's quick, sounds good, and it's using all internal sounds, not using external plugins, because for us, that computer just, there was no way, right? But mobile, at campuses, we want to have a rig that our keys players can come in. It's a house rig. So we have house drum kits, we want to have house keys rigs, and I'm always open to if our players want to come and set up their own stuff and use, there's really easy ways to use this in conjunction with your stuff. But yeah, we just needed a really robust system for that. And we used to have S90s, and they're great, but a little outdated. But the key bed is great. And again, this can be a budget thing, but for us, a Nord, we started down the Nord path, and the stage is just almost double the price of the Electro. And so we got Electros, and they were good. They're awesome. Nothing bad to say about Nords. But for us, a drone pad is such an important thing. And I put those in the tracks a lot. I try when it makes sense. But I want our guys to use it and use it dynamically and musically. The Sunday Keys template has that, but we didn't have a great way to do that analog. So we went on this pursuit. It was really fueled by transposing. And again, I'm not educated on the Nord stages, but the Electros, I think they're the same on the stages, so correct me if I'm wrong. But man, the transpose function is very clunky on the Electros. And again, competent keys players, the gigging, if you know your gear and it's yours and you use it all the time, not a problem. But for a house rig where we just want all varying levels of people to be able to come in and just go simple, easy, not stressful, it wasn't working great. The goal was, we had a guy who used these on the road and talked about how much he loved them, the Yamaha CP88. They also have a 76, and then the S90 is like a version of that, I think. Again, I'm stepping out of my wheelhouse here. But it's just 3 sections, like piano, electric piano, synth, and it just felt really simple and easy. I know it looks like a lot of lights, but again, for us, compared to the Nord and with people coming in that may not, similar to Ableton, it's like the only time they're seeing this is Sunday mornings. We wanted it to be really robust and easy. So that was the main impetus for this, and transpose was really easy. So you just hit transpose, 0 means nothing, and then turn the knob to go up or down. That made it a winner, and it's about half the price of the Nords. Again, love the Nords. Just for us and what we needed and wanted, this was a great answer. But yeah, it's just 3 sections and these little switches, which are very satisfying. Turn them on or off, and you can see it disappears. So my presets, I actually save it with them all on, and then just like piano volume is up, but the Rhodes and the pad are pretty much down, and you can blend those if you want. Really easy with just these volume knobs. The other thing for us was like the main stage killer, I would say, is this Atmosphere pad pedal. These came out and honestly have been such a game changer in the church world. If you guys don't know about them, check them out. Aerospace Audio is the company. And yeah, the Atmosphere is this pad drone pedal, and it just loops drone pads infinitely. You can get into the settings, but it's designed like a guitar pedal. We do have a couple rigs I've built for acoustic boards that have those on there as well, and you can use those for small setups. If it's just acoustic, you have this pad under you, it's great. But for the keys rig setup, we wanted to take it a little further because again, in Sunday keys, we had a volume control for the drone pad, and it had a reverb in the channel. If you were to just cut volume immediately, you're not gonna immediately lose the drone pad. You have this nice reverb tail. And so again, I was on this quest to like, how do we do this analog digital pedal, but analog audio. So found out through a lot of research, these Old Blood Noise Endeavors is a guitar pedal company. They make awesome stuff. They make this little expression slider. And traditionally expression pedals, you're going in one side, out the other, and then the volume controls that way. Usually expression is used with MIDI, and you're using it to control a function. Like if this reverb pedal had an expression output, it does have an expression output. I'm sure it lets you control like the decay time, the whatever functions of the reverb you want, and you can control that. This was great because it's not a volume pedal for your foot, it's like a fader for your hands, and we just love that. Yeah, figured out that you can take mono out of the atmosphere, and before you get angry about that, you take mono out and you go into the expression pedal and it's splitting. So now we have volume control if we're doing, it's a TRS cable, so tip ring sleeve. But yeah, input, and then if you do the ring is the output, I believe. It will function as a volume pedal. And this is a nice guitar hack. You can technically use any expression pedal as a volume pedal if you set it up the right way with the TRS cable. So then it's going into the RV6, Boss RV6, tried and true, simple reverb, mainly needed something this size that was also stereo because, like I said, we're going mono out, but it's a drone pad. So I don't think there's a ton of stereo information. Honestly, I'm sure, obviously it's gonna sound better subjectively, but I'm basically forcing mono and then recreating stereo on the output. Yeah, output of this is like my drone pad module, I like to call it. So I've sold those a few times where it's whatever keyboard you have, if you have like space like this, I can just make you this module and put it on top. But then for this, obviously we want everything tacked down. So cables are running, tacked down, very guitar pedal board. The other great thing is this CP88 has a input. So before I had a stereo DI and I'm running 2 inputs into a quad DI I had custom made, and then you were taking the outputs. But again, the CP88 is great because it has 1/4 inch inputs and then XLR outs. So we don't need a DI. And this input has a little trim pot so you can adjust, but it just works. There's no setup in the menu. Whatever you plug into that, you're just gonna hear through the outputs. So with that, we have volume control for the pad independently, and then this master is controlling both the keys, volume, and the drone. So if you turn this all the way off, you get nothing. So that's why we emphasize, use the volume on the sounds, leave this alone. But yeah, it's sitting out of there. And then yeah, I made these cable looms just to have everything super tidy. Power for this rig, for both these pedals, power for the keyboard. Got these little hooks that just happen to line up perfectly with some of the screw holes. USB is just a bonus. Some people use it, so you can use this as just a MIDI controller if you want to bypass the sounds. But yeah, this loom is going in here, and the sustain pedal I kept out of the loom because, as we all know, those things don't last. I will say this Proline Guitar Center brand has been great. We have had very few issues, so maybe if you guys don't know about that, check them out. They're cheap too. So yeah, that's outside the loom, but it's all run together. And then the XLR outs and goes down along the side and goes into this little junction box, custom made. This is where it gets crazy. Power for the pad, and this is similar to like our rack panels, right? It's similar connectors just on this die-cast aluminum enclosure. This is the power cable for the CP88. I converted it to PowerCon. And then this is the one spot powering both of the pedals. And that's the USB, and then the outputs left and right, red is right. And then on the other side, this is where everything comes out. And so I'm converting USB in here to Cat 5. So again, this rarely gets used, but if you wanted to, theoretically, we've done it a few times. You can have your laptop, if you are using MainStage or whatever, DAW for your sounds. Ableton is great for keys too. I know you've done some stuff on that. If you're wanting to use that and use this as a controller, this will run power. This will power most low power MIDI controllers. So I haven't tested all of them, obviously, but yeah, you could have your laptop rig off stage, have this, it's a 50-foot cable loom, and yeah, use it as a controller. And then yeah, left and right, red is right, XLR outs, same PowerCon as we always use. Last quick little thing, this is all mounted down too. So this stand, this is the quick lock, what do they call it? Monolith, I think. I love it because it doesn't have to fold, so I can mount it down to this wheel board. And then if I need to raise or lower, you just unscrew and raise or lower with these. So it's great. It's drilled in. This is a custom wheel board we got made from Mental Case, is a road case company in town. They're awesome. They made all these for me. These are details that took forever. Because it's a worship leader rig, I found a mic stand that can mount into this keyboard stand, so you don't have to have a separate mic stand. Again, it's as little on stage as we can. So this, and I added little clamps here, so when it's not in use, it just rests here. Pull this off, and then insert it here. And this is another great thing, this little thumb screw I knew was gonna go missing. So one of our volunteers had a great idea to show me like a swivel mount. So yeah, that's swivel mount drilled in with this cable. So even if it gets totally unplugged, we're never losing the thumb screw. And so a band leader could use this if they're playing keys and they need a talkback mic or BGVs, whatever. But yeah, mostly this was born out of trying to make a worship leader rig, and it's mobile. So a lot of times we'll be at the front with a worship leader and then they needed to pull it back to be off stage, not block screens. So yeah, the goal was like make a worship leader rig that hopefully also can be great for keys player, band leader, all that. So yeah, that was a long thing, but there it is. Keys rig.
If you're on the road or maybe you're at church and you want to buy some things, we'll link it all in the description.
And just because we talked about it so much.
Yeah, man.
Like I will say, so there's a new version of it.
Okay.
It's a full rack, but especially the half rack, a lot of bare bones setups you could have used with Prime too.
Okay, cool.
You could actually do a redundant setup with 2 Prime iPads or computers. And
nice.
Again, the Play Audio makes it like really easy.
That's awesome.
So yeah,
man.
It's a great interface. Like I said, if you can find one.
If you can find one, he'll buy it from you.
Yeah.
That's awesome, dude. Well, guys,
Love
thank
it.
y'all for listening today. Thank you for watching if you're watching on YouTube. Seth Penn, thank you for being on the podcast. But, of course, your brand is Seth Builds Rigs, and you can find them on Instagram, SethBuildsRigs.com. You can also find that on the show notes or description. But thanks for being on the episode today. Subscribe here on the Worship Keys YouTube or podcast for amazing episodes every Wednesday. Hopefully going to be helpful for you. Also, if you have more questions about this, feel free to email me, Carson@theworshipkeys.com. I will forward this over to Seth as well, and we'll hopefully be able to answer your questions if you're confused by anything. And if you want to see more content like this, or if you need some more materials on this and we didn't quite get to your question today, please reach out to us as well. We want to help you. And we really just were striving for excellence within our ministry and industry. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see y'all next week.
Awesome. Thanks, man.